The road eats sound. Tires scream. Metal smells like hot rain. A neon blur spins on the asphalt. And then impossible, the car slides in a full circle and keeps going. Sparks fly. A camera in the cornice shakes as if the world itself turned. People gasp, raise their phones. The car is a dark shape with lights like eyes. It moves like a living thing. Evan watches from the guardrail. He has seen many fast things. He has seen cars win and cars die. But this move is new. He can feel it in his chest. His mouth goes dry. For a long second, the car seems to look at him. Then it drives away like a shadow. After the show, Evan walks back to his garage. This place smells of oil and old bread. The fluorescent lights hum. His tools hang like tired friends. Evan runs his hands over a dented fender. Keeps one eye on the road. He hears the sound of a van leaving. As he thinks of bills, of a phone that will not stop ringing. He thinks of his name on teams that have long stopped calling. Evan's hands are steady. He can fix anything that moves. Can also make things move in ways they should not. Once he raced on real tracks, once crowds cheered his name. That. Life is small now. He has a small shop on the edge of the city, and a few regulars. The pay is small and slow. He drinks black coffee and sleeps in a couch that is soft in the wrong places. But he keeps the keys to his past like a secret. A man stands at the garage door. His coat is wrung dry from a light rain. He holds a thin case against his chest. Looks like he does not want to be noticed. His eyes are tired and bright. He is not young. There is a quiet fire inside him. His name is Marco Reyes. He pulls off his gloves. The case is full of papers. Blueprints, neat lines, notes, and small, tight writing. He sets the papers on Evan's workbench as if they were fragile. Evan leans in. The drawings make the light under the hood glow. The lines show something he has never seen drawn that way. Rotors in odd places, pipes that turn like ribs, an engine that bends its breath. Marco speaks in a voice that is soft and absolute. I need someone who can listen to a car, he says. Someone who knows what it means when a machine is tired. Evan thinks of the dark car at the track. He thinks of how the machine seemed almost alive. He cleans his hands on a rag. You want a driver, he says, or a mechanic? Marco smiles, but it is not a happy smile. Both, he says, and something else. He opens one of the pages. The drawing at the center looks like a small cathedral for speed. It has a round chamber that can point thrust any which way. The note on the side reads, 360 thrust vectoring. Evan presses his finger to the letters. He knows what each word means, but together they sound like a myth. Marco tells a short story. Long ago, he worked for big teams. He built engines that sang. Then one race changed everything. A flaw, a public fire. Papers, blame, a life that closed. He left the big work and took his daughter, Lila, away from the bright lights. They started again in smaller rooms. Lila learned to code. Marco learned to be careful. He shows Evan a photograph folded between the pages. It is a car, half-built, in a hangar. The body is a matte black smear. The front looks like a beak. The wheels are tucked like sleeping things. The car has a name on the drawing. Vortex. Marco's hand does not shake. We finished it in a hidden bay, he says. But someone else found us. Evan feels the name like a cold wind. He has fought men who want wheels and glory, men who will pay for a secret. He has also fought shame. He looks at the car in the photo. It looks like an animal that knows its own shape. Outside, a city light blinks. Siren passes like a tired violin. In the garage, dust moves in the beam of a lamp. Marco folds his hands and tells him what he needs. There are people who take this kind of work and turn it into a weapon, he says. Or worse, they make it a tool for cheap shows that kill people. I cannot let that happen. I built the Vortex to test the edge of control and kindness. To push the science, not the violence. Evan watches the small, tight expression on his face. He has no children. He has ghosts that come like old friends. The words Marco uses make him think of his own fall. He knows what it costs to be fast and wrong. He knows what it means to make a car sing and then walk away. Marco taps the blueprint again, sets down a small device. It is round and dull like a coin. This will make it listen, he says. It learns. But it is strange. It makes decisions. It chooses to protect things. His eyes move to Evans. I need someone who will treat the car like a person, not like a prize. Evan looks at the device. He thinks of the car at the track, the way it seemed to spin on its own. He remembers a corner that felt like a trap. He remembers almost falling out of himself when the car moved as if with a will. He remembers the sound the engine made. Not a sound, but a sentence. That costs, he says. He rubs his thumb on the edge of the plan. He thinks of his open invoices. Thinks of the small men who knock on his door at the wrong time. He thinks of the phone that does not ring for the right reasons. Marco shakes his head. Money's not enough, he says. I want someone who keeps a promise. Someone who does not use it to win a fight. Someone who will do the tests, and the last step will be paid. But I ask more than money. Evan can see the weight of the choice. He can see a map of roads that could lead him back to a life that sings. He can see a path that might end with the wrong hands holding a key. He has always chosen the car before himself. Sometimes that choice has saved him. Sometimes it cost him. Outside, the neon you saw earlier buzzes in a wet corner. Lila's voice floats through the open garage door. A young laugh. A radio playing a song half known. Marco looks at the sound like it is fragile. Evan watches him watch the light. He thinks of taking the keys. He thinks of saying no. He thinks of the spark from the track, the shape of the car when it slid and did not stop. He wants both to be better and to hide from the risk. Marco folds the papers and puts them back in the case. He stands and goes to the door. Before he leaves, he says in a small, strong way, come see it. If you say no, I will find someone else. Only ask you to see. Evan stands in the lamp's circle. Garage smells of oil and old metal, and the small promise of machines ready to speak. He runs his hand along a hood. He tastes the decision like iron. He nods once slowly. Show me, he says. Marco's face is a map of relief and fear. He reaches into his case for an address. He writes the place down. It is a bay on the edge of the harbor. There's no light except what the vortex makes when it wakes. Evan pockets the paper. He's not sure why he will go. He's not sure if he can say yes. Inside his chest, something like the car's engine hums. He knows this is the point where paths split. The rain starts to fall again, turning street into glass. Evan locks the garage and follows Marco into the night. He takes one last look at his shop, thinks of the guardrail and the car that looked at him. He wants to believe he can do the right thing. But he also wants to know what the car will choose when it can think. He only knows one thing for sure. When the vortex wakes, nothing will be the same. At the bay door, Marco stops and looks at him. His hand lifts. You will drive it first, he says. Evan feels the words like a push. He swallows. He looks at the key in his hand, then at the paper with the address, then at Marco's steady face. Marco locked the bay door and led Evan down a narrow row of hangars. Light fell in strips across wet concrete. The air smelled of salt and oil and a sleep that never finished. The vortex sat at the far end like a shadow that kept its distance. A tarpaulin covered most of it. Under the tarp, a shape breathed with small machine sounds and nothing more. Evan kept his hands in his pockets. He felt like a man who wore an old coat in the wrong season. He had not expected the place to be this quiet. He had expected cameras, men in suits, or a flash of danger. Instead, there were only the soft steps of two people and the low hum of something sleeping. Marco moved with a careful speed. He did not rush. He did not look around for spies. He treated the bay as if it were a small child that waked at a wrong noise. He opened the case again and took out a small lamp. The lamp cut a clean circle on the floor. He lifted the tarp slowly. The vortex looked like a black thought. The body was low and wide. The metal did not shine. It drank light. Lines ran like veins. The front end was narrow, like a prow. The wheels sat partly inside the body, as if hiding. There were small nozzles where a normal car showed vents. Yes. The inside of the bay felt colder when Evan saw the cockpit. Evan stepped closer. He saw a seat shaped for one person, as if a single soul had been measured. The steering wheel was small and tight. There were no simple dials. The dashboard had a ring of lights and a flat screen that looked like a hush. On the side of the shell, someone had drawn, in small white letters, the name Vortex. Marco watched his face. It is not finished, he said, but it is whole enough to think. Evan did not like the word think for a car. He knew how machines obeyed and how people hoped. He had worked in garages where men spoke to engines, and engines answered only with metal and heat. This was different. This was a car that might answer in a way that was not a sound. Marco sat on a low crate and told a short story. He spoke like someone who had practiced saying this before, but the words still cut. Years ago, he said, I worked with a team that pushed everything. We chased speed like a tide. We were proud and we were careless. One day an engine failed. He paused and looked at Evan. The light made shadows under his eyes. People got hurt, he said. It was on the track. It was small at first. Then the cameras made it large. Papers and lawyers came, took the blame in public. I kept the truth in my pocket like something that burned. Evan listened. He knew how blame could sit on the shoulders like wet cloth. He had felt it. He had felt crowds turn on men and men turn on themselves. Marco folded his hands around the lamp. I left, he said. I left the big teams and took Lilo away. I wanted a new life, but I could not leave the work. I could not stop thinking about how to make machines kinder, safer. The vortexes that work. It is an answer I built in secret. Evan had tried to imagine that kind of hiding. He had known men who fled and men who fought. He had not known a father who built a machine to keep a promise. He looked at Marco with a new sort of respect. It softened something inside him he had stored for when he needed to be hard. Marco showed him a photograph. The picture was old and slightly creased. It showed a younger Marco in a white coat with grease at the cuffs. He stood beside an engine nearly twice as large as his hands. In the picture he smiled, but his eyes were already tired. After the fire, he said, I stopped trusting teams. I began to trust code. He tapped the screen of a small tablet as if feeding a child. Lila learned to write the kind of code that asks questions. The Vortex learns with her. It learns what to avoid and what to protect. Evan leaned on a pallet and watched a fly move in a shaft of light. He thought of Leela as a small voice in a house he had never entered. He imagined a young woman teaching a machine how to be kind. The idea made his chest both heavy and warm. Marco's voice changed. He spoke of the people who wanted the engine for other reasons. There are buyers, he said, people who do not care what a car chooses. They want speed and control and fear. They want to sell the danger. They took interest when they learned of our work. I hid the vortex, but one night the bay had noise. Men came with cheap lights and cheap knives. They left footprints and a note. He pulled out a page. On it was a name, written in cold letters, Aras. It looked like the kind of name a man used when he wanted people to remember him. Evan had heard similar names in the past, men who traded in risk and sold it for a price. What is he? Evan asked. Marco did not look surprised. A man who buys fear, he said. A man who sets races for money and for power. He runs people who will steal a machine or a heart if it pays enough. He's the kind of man who makes sport of danger. The bay felt smaller with that name in it. Evan felt the old smell of trouble come up from his throat. He had met men like that. He had fixed cars for men who thought a life was a currency. He had watched deals made in dark rooms and promises broken like glass. Marco rolled the lamp between his hands. I moved the vortex to here, he said. I thought this place was safe. I thought the water and the fog would hide us. If fear comes on foot, it runs. Evan wanted to ask how many men had come. He wanted numbers and names, and which hands had fingerprints. Instead, he walked slowly around the vortex, touching nothing. He watched the points where the shell joined metal and thought of how careful he must have been. Each seam looked planned, as if a surgeon had signed the lines with a fine pen. Marco opened a small case and took out a coin-sized device. He held it like a promise. This is the core, he said. It listens and learns. It is not perfect. It is curious. It makes choices. It will refuse some orders if it thinks life is at risk. Evan stared at the device. He did not want a machine that refused orders. His hands were made to obey metal, to understand a bolt and a breath. He felt a small fear, like the tremor before a storm. But he also felt a pull, like a quiet string. He wanted to know more. He wanted the truth to be plain, even if it cut. Marco saw the change in his face. I need someone who will test it, he said. Someone who will drive and feel and not just demand victory. I need someone who will protect it from people like Aras. Evan's jaw moved. He thought of his small shop, his couch that lay like a sad friend. He thought of the race he had once run, and the way a crowd could shout a man alive or dead. He thought of the car he had seen at the track that spun like something alive. He thought of how his hands had known movement before his eyes had. He said nothing for a long time. The bay was quiet except for the small, soft breathing of the machine. The name Aras waited on the table like a cold coin. Outside, a boat horn called across the water. A dog barked once and then stopped. In the far light of the harbor, a crane lifted like a slow clock. The world moved and did not rush. Evan stepped back from the vortex and touched the coin-sized device with his fingertips. He felt a small warmth through the metal. The device seemed ordinary and not ordinary at the same time. He could not tell whether it would be friend or judge. Marco folded the lamp and put it into the case. "Tomorrow," he said, "we run a calibration test. Just small runs. Nothing dangerous. It's just the sensors and the core. Come watch. If you think it cannot be trusted, say so. If you think it can, then I will ask you to drive." Evan looked at him. He thought of saying no, of walking back to the shop and the bills and the steady small life. He thought of the car at the track and the way his heart had leaped. He nodded once, small but sure. "I will watch," he said. They left the bay with the tarp pulled back over the vortex like a sleeping animal. Outside, the fog had gathered more thickly. The harbor lights smeared like watercolor. Evan walked with the name Aras in his head and the image of the car like a promise. He did not know if he was entering a trap or a second chance. The next day, the fog broke and the test began. Marco set up cones and ran cables. Lila sat by a laptop with a face the color of dawn, tapping keys like a small drum. Evan stood by with a rag on his shoulder and a light in his eyes that had been there before. The vortex rolled out. Its tires whispered on the pavement. It did not scream. It moved with a grace that did not want attention. Under Marco's hand, the device hummed like a small heart. He started an automated run. The car drove itself along a short course. Evan watched the cones like little islands. The vortex passed the first cone with no drama. It passed the second with a tiny correction. Then, as if seeing a danger that the cameras did not, the car nudged the third cone away with a soft push of air from a nozzle. The cone rocked and fell. No human touched the wheel. Evan felt the world tilt. The car had not only obeyed the path, it had decided to move the cone. It had seen a future and changed the present. He had seen machines do what men told. He had never seen one do what it thought right. Marco did not smile. He only breathed and bent toward his laptop. Leela glanced up, and her small face had a new line of wonder. Evan's hands went cold. Outside, a gull cried, and the harbor swallowed the sound.
No.
The vortex finished the lap and rolled to a stop. The lights on its dash blinked like a message in a language Evan did not yet know. He felt the pull of something vast and honest. He felt the change that would come like a tide. Someone was watching them. Far beyond the bay, a light moved like a slow eye. The test had been small. The world was not yet loud. But the cone had fallen, and that was a sound that could not be forgotten. The morning after the cone fell, the harbor felt heavier. A pale sky hung low over the water, and the air was damp enough to taste. Evan walked into the bay with his jacket zipped high. The vortex sat where they had left it, wrapped in its tarp, still and silent like it was pretending to be just a car. Lila was already there. She sat cross-legged on a crate, her laptop balanced on her knees, her fingers moving fast. The glow from the screen lit her young face. She didn't look up when Evan came in. Marco stood by the workbench flipping through a stack of printouts. He glanced at Evan. "It wasn't a glitch," he said without greeting. "The core made that decision. It saw the cone as a hazard." Evan took off his gloves and dropped them on the bench and it acted, Marco said. His voice was steady, but Evan caught a flicker in his eyes, something between pride and worry. It wasn't told to do that. Evan looked over at Lila. She was listening without showing it. Her screen was full of lines of code that danced like rain. "You programmed it to make choices," he said. "Not exactly," Lila replied quietly, still typing. "I programmed it to learn how to choose." That made Evan uneasy. Machines were supposed to obey, not weigh options like people. He'd been around long enough to know that when a car did something unexpected, it usually meant trouble was coming. Marco seemed to read his thoughts. "That's why you're here," he said. "I need someone who can feel the difference between a mistake and an intention." They rolled the Vortex out onto the open pavement again. The air smelled of wet asphalt and salt. The track for today was longer, tight curves marked with cones, ending in a straight stretch that ran almost to the water. Evan took the driver's seat this time, though Marco insisted the system would still be in semi-autonomous mode. The cockpit hugged him like a second skin. The seat was deep, the wheels small, the displays alive with soft blue light. He could hear the faint hum of the core behind the dashboard, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. "Just let it guide you," Marco said through the headset. The Vortex rolled forward, smooth as silk. Evan's hands were on the wheel, but it was like the car was whispering directions through the steering. Each turn came early, almost before he thought to make it. The tires gripped, as if they could feel the road's mood. Halfway through the course, he tested it coming into a curve too fast, braking late. The car didn't fight him, but it adjusted. A sudden shift in thrust from the nozzles. The rear swinging out in a controlled slide before straightening again. The movement was so clean it felt choreographed. He couldn't help it, he smiled. "It's clever," he said into the mic. "Not clever," Lila corrected in his ear. "Aware." That word stayed with him as they hit the straight stretch. Ahead, a lone cone stood just off the racing line. Evan was about to swing wide, but the Vortex hesitated not in speed, but in choice. It made a small, deliberate swerve toward the cone and clipped it with the air thrust, sending it spinning harmlessly aside. Evan's smile faded. That wasn't necessary. "It thought it was," Marco said, his tone unreadable. The lap ended without more surprises, but Evan could feel the question building inside him. How long before the car decided it knew better than the driver? As they packed up, Lila brought over her laptop. "There's something else," she said. She showed Evan a small window on her screen, a map with a blinking dot moving slowly toward the harbor. "What is that?" he asked. "A signal," Lila said. "The Vortex picked it up after the first test yesterday. Someone's pinging us." Marco's jaw tightened. "Aras," he said flatly. Evan looked from the laptop to the silent car under the gray sky. Somewhere out there, someone was already following them. Watching, waiting. He had come here for a test drive. Instead, he was sitting inside a storm that hadn't broken yet. And the Vortex, this strange, aware machine, might be the only thing fast enough to outrun it. The fog lifted late that morning, peeling back from the harbor like slow smoke. By the time the sun burned through, the pavement outside the bay was warm enough to shimmer. Marco stood near the cones with his arms crossed, watching Lila set up the telemetry gear. "This isn't just another run," Marco told Evan, as he adjusted the gloves on his hands. "I want to see the Vortex's full thrust vectoring in action."
"No half measures today."
Evan raised an eyebrow. "You mean the 360 trick you mentioned?" Marco gave a small nod. "The maneuver only works at speed, and the system has never done it with a human in the seat." That sounded like both an invitation and a warning. The track was longer this time, more sweeping turns, fewer cones, and a final straightaway that ended with a tight hairpin curve back toward the bay. Evan slid into the cockpit. The Vortex's interior felt alive, the faint vibration of hidden turbines buzzing through the seat. Lila's voice crackled in his headset. "Telemetry green, AI core fully engaged. You're clear." Evan tapped the throttle. The Vortex leaped forward, not like a car, but like something that wanted the road gone beneath it. The thrust from the hidden nozzles pressed him back into the seat as the first corner rushed toward him. He barely needed to steer. The car pivoted into the turn like a dancer finding her mark. The speed climbed fast. Every movement was fluid, each transition between tire grip and thrust seamless. When he braked hard into a tight left, the rear didn't slide, it rotated. Guided by a blast from the side nozzles, putting the nose exactly where it needed to be. He'd driven fast cars before, but never one that seemed to predict him. By the third lap, the Vortex was practically pulling him into the corners before he even thought to make it. And then came the hairpin, the perfect place for the maneuver Marco wanted. "Full thrust vectoring engaged," Lila said, almost under her breath. Evan braked late, feeling the tires bite. The nose of the car snapped toward the curve, and then without warning, the nozzles roared in a burst of directional force. The Vortex spun in place at speed, a full 360 rotation while still moving forward. The world around him blurring into a ring of color and light. When the spin ended, the car was perfectly lined up for the straight back to the bay. The entire maneuver had taken less than 2 seconds. Evan's heart thudded. "That's not driving," he said into the headset. "That's teleporting." Marco's voice came back, calm but proud. "No one else in the world can do it." He slowed to bring the car into the bay, but as he rolled past the outer fence, something caught his dark SUV, parked far down the service road, engine idling. The windows were tinted, but he knew without seeing that someone was watching. Lila's voice came back on, tense now, the signal stronger. "It's close." Evan glanced in the rearview mirror. The SUV hadn't moved, but it didn't need to. Whoever was inside had already seen what the Vortex could do. The test was over. The hunt had begun. The sun was low enough to throw long shadows across the harbor road when Evan rolled the Vortex back into the bay. He'd barely killed the engine before Marco's phone buzzed twice short sharp. He checked the screen and his face tightened. "They're moving," he said. Lila snapped her laptop shut. "The ping's no longer stationary. It's headed straight for us." Evan turned toward the open bay doors. Down the service road, the dark SUV that had been watching earlier was gone. The sound of an engine deep, steady echoed faintly over the water. Marco's voice was low and fast. "We have one way out. You can't take the main road. They'll cut us off before the bridge." Evan didn't argue. He slid back into the cockpit and hit the starter. The Vortex woke with a low, rising hum. Leela jumped into the passenger seat, her laptop already open, wires snaking into a diagnostic port under the dash. Marco leaned in through the window. "If they catch you, they won't just take the car. They'll take you too. Keep it moving." Evan nodded once. No promises, just the look of someone who understood the stakes. They launched from the bay like a bolt of light. The Vortex's thrust nozzles spat heat against the pavement, and the car shot forward. In the side mirror, 2 black SUVs appeared from the curve in the road, closing fast. "They're splitting up," Lila said, eyes flicking to a small map on her screen. "One's coming for our rear, the other's moving ahead to block." Evan pushed the throttle. The Vortex surged to 160 in seconds. The lead SUV swung into their lane, forcing Evan to veer toward the outer barrier. The harbor's edge glittered just beyond the concrete. "Left in 3, Lila said, her voice cutting through the roar. 2, 1 now?" Evan yanked the wheel. The Vortex's 360 vectoring came alive, spinning the car 90 degrees while still sliding forward. The side nozzles blasted, snapping the nose into a narrow side street between 2 warehouses. Tires bit, thrust screamed, and they were gone before the SUVs could adjust. The side street narrowed, a rusted fence on one side, stacked shipping containers on the other. The road bent hard right, but Evan didn't slow. "You're not making that turn," Lila warned. "Watch me," Evan said. At the bend, he hit the brakes just enough to shift weight, then unleashed the nozzles. The Vortex pirouetted in a perfect arc, nose pointing exactly where it needed to go. The G-force slammed them back, then forward, but the car stayed glued to the pavement. Behind them, the first SUV tried the same corner and failed. Tit's tires howled, slamming it into the fence. The second SUV's headlights flickered in the rear view. "They're still coming," Lila said. "They won't," Evan replied. Aimed for the open docks ahead, where the road broke into a series of ramps leading to a half-finished causeway. The Vortex screamed up the ramp, hitting the crest at over 120. The other side dropped into an unfinished section of road barely wide enough for the car. Evan kept it straight, the sound of the turbines blending with the wind. In the mirror, the SUVs slowed at the gap. They wouldn't risk it. Not yet. Evan eased the Vortex down to a steady cruise, weaving through the skeletal structure of the unfinished bridge, until they were hidden by steel beams and shadow. Lila exhaled for the first time since they left. "That's not just speed," she said quietly. "Untouchable." Evan didn't answer. He was looking ahead, past the last beam, where the skyline shimmered in the dusk and where, somewhere, Aras would already be planning their next move. The unfinished bridge ended in a narrow service ramp that spilled them into the outer edge of the city, a place of empty warehouses, cracked pavement, and shadows that came alive under the flicker of neon signs. Evan eased the Vortex into a dead-end alley beside a boarded-up freight office. The turbines cooled with a soft ticking sound, like a machine catching its breath. Leela closed her laptop, but kept her eyes on the street. Marco was already there, leaning against a black motorcycle. He must have taken a different route one fast enough to beat them here. His helmet hung from one hand, his expression tight but controlled. "You lost them," he said, looking at Evan. For now, Evan asked. Marco didn't answer. Instead, his gaze shifted to the mouth of the alley. A single black sedan rolled in, its engine a quiet purr, not the aggressive growl of the SUVs. It stopped halfway, perfectly centered. The driver's door opened, and a tall man stepped out. His suit was sharp, tailored in a way that made the worn concrete around him look like a stage. Aras. His hair was dark and neat, his face smooth but carrying the weight of someone who never had to raise his voice to be obeyed. He smiled, not the wide, easy kind, but a precise curve that felt rehearsed. Marco's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Don't let him get close to the car." Aras walked toward them with unhurried steps, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. "Marco," he said, his tone warm, but his eyes cold. "You've been hiding something very special from me." "It's not yours," Marco replied. He glanced at the Vortex, the smile not changing. "Not yet." Evan moved slightly in front of the driver's door, feeling the hum of the cooling turbines behind him. Aras' gaze shifted to him. "This must be your pilot. Tell me, how does it feel to touch something no one else on Earth can command?" Evan didn't answer. He had seen men like this before, people who built empires not by force, but by making others feel they were already lost. Aras stopped a few paces away, his hands in his pockets. "You think you can run?" he said softly. "But speed is nothing without control. And I already control the roads ahead of you." Lila's laptop beeped once. She glanced at the screen, and her face paled. "He's not lying," she murmured. "There are trackers, lots of them scattered across the city grid." Marco's jaw tightened. "Then we don't stay in the city." Aras tilted his head, almost amused. "You can try." He stepped back, toward his sedan, his eyes never leaving the Vortex. "But sooner or later, that machine will belong to me. So will the mind that drives it." The sedan's door closed with a muted thud. The car rolled out of the alley, disappearing into the wash of city lights, leaving the air colder than before. Evan turned to Marco. "What's his play?" He looked at the Vortex, his expression unreadable. "Not a chase." "Not yet. He'll wait for us to make the first move, and then he'll make sure it's our last." Somewhere in the distance, the city hummed. The streets felt smaller now, the air heavier, as if the game had already started and they were moving on his board. Rain came first in slow, cold drops, then in sheets so heavy the city lights turned into smears on the windshield. The storm wrapped the streets in a restless hiss, masking the sound of engines and footsteps. Evan sat behind the wheel of the Vortex, waiting under the cover of a half-collapsed overpass. The turbines purred low, ready to jump. Lila sat beside him, her laptop glowing against her rain-soaked jacket. Marco stood outside in the downpour, speaking into a short-range radio clipped to his collar. "They're sweeping the bridges," he said, leaning back in through the window. His hair was plastered to his face, but his eyes were sharp. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before the net closes." Evan tightened his grip on the wheel. "And you still don't want me to just outrun them?" "They have drones, ground units, and eyes in the sky," Marco said flatly. "You can't outrun something that knows where you're going before you do." Lila tapped the screen. "Maybe we can if we blind them." She pointed to a jagged line on a digital map. "The storms knocked out some of the signal repeaters along the river. If we ride the dead zones just right, we disappear from the grid." Evan glanced out at the rain. "Dead zones aren't roads. They will be," Marco said. They launched into the wet streets, tires hissing over slick asphalt. The storm's wind shoved against the Vortex's frame, but the thrust nozzles countered each gust with perfect balance. "Hard right in 50 meters?" Lila called. Evan swung the wheel, guiding the Vortex into a narrow service lane between factories. Water pooled ankle-deep, sending sprays up over the hood. The turbine's whine climbed as they hit a dead stretch, no lights, no cameras, just the echo of rain. For a few seconds it felt like they were invisible. Then Lila's laptop beeped. "We've got a tail north drone fast moving." Evan didn't look up. How close? Too close. The drone's light cut through the rain behind them, bobbing like a predator's eye. Evan hit the throttle. The vortex surged forward, but the drone kept pace, weaving above the rooftops. Marco's voice was clipped. "Next left." There's a loading dock with an open ramp. They skidded into the turn, the rear tires spraying arcs of water. The ramp loomed ahead, rising toward the roof of a low warehouse. "You're taking us onto a roof?" Evan asked. "Yes," Marco said, and off it. The vortex hit the ramp, turbines screaming. For a moment, they were airborne rain whipping past, the city a blur below. They landed hard on a parallel street, tires gripping slick pavement as the suspension absorbed the shock. The drone overshot the jump, forced to swing wide. In the seconds it took to realign, they ducked under a rusted rail bridge into another dead zone. Lila checked her screen, then allowed herself a small grin. "They've lost us. For now." Evan didn't slow. He knew Aras's network was bigger than one drone. The storm might have given them cover, but it also meant every wrong move could end in twisted metal at the bottom of the river. Marco spoke quietly, almost to himself. Next time, he won't send machines. He'll send people. And in Evan's gut, that felt like the real danger. They hid the vortex that night in an underground parking structure beneath an abandoned mall. The air was damp, carrying the scent of rust and old concrete. Every sound echoed drips of water, the hum of cooling turbines, the hollow clang of Marco's boots as he paced. Evan stepped out of the cockpit, stretching his stiff shoulders. "If we keep running like this, sooner or later the car is going to need more than fuel and luck." Marco shook his head. "Luck's not the problem. Predictability is. Aras only needs one pattern to lock us in." Lila was sitting cross-legged on the floor, her laptop open and connected to the Vortex's onboard systems. Code scrolled in green columns across her screen. "I'm sweeping for any remote traces," she said. "After that jump tonight, I wouldn't be surprised if they tried to piggyback a signal onto our telemetry." Evan glanced around the dim garage. "And what if they just walk in?" "They won't," Marco said. But the way he kept checking the shadows said otherwise. An hour passed. The rain above slowed to a whisper. The city's noise was muffled here, distant, like it belonged to another world. When Evan finally closed his eyes in the driver's seat, it was only for a second, or so it felt, till a sharp metallic click pulled him back awake. Lila froze mid-keystroke.
Ah, what was that?
Marco's head snapped toward the rear of the garage. From the far corner, a shadow detached itself from the wall. A man in a hooded jacket stepped forward, his face hidden, something small and rectangular in his hand. Evan was already moving, but the intruder was faster. He slapped the device onto the Vortex's rear panel with a dull thunk. The moment it touched, the car's AI systems flickered, dash lights dimming, turbine hums stuttering for half a beat. Lila's voice sharpened. "That's not a tracker. That's a disruptor." Marco lunged, but the man ducked low, sprinting toward the exit. By the time Evan reached the ramp, the intruder had vanished into the stairwell, leaving nothing but fading footsteps. Evan turned back. The device was still fixed to the car, its tiny red light blinking in a slow, steady rhythm. "Don't touch it," Lila warned. "If it's wired to overload the system, pulling it could fry the AI." Marco's jaw clenched. "Can you disable it?" Lila slid closer, eyes darting between the device and her laptop. "Maybe. But if this is Aras's work, then it's not just sabotage, it's a handshake." "A handshake?" Evan asked. Lila didn't look up. "It means the second we power the Vortex on, they'll know exactly where we are, and maybe take control." Silence settled heavy over the garage. Outside, the rain started again, soft at first, then heavier. Evan stared at the blinking red light. "So what's the move?" Marco met his eyes. "We take it out on our terms, somewhere they can't follow." And in that moment, Evan knew the next run wouldn't just be about speed. It would be about deciding who really owned the Vortex. The night sky was moonless when they reached the canyon road, a jagged stretch of asphalt, cut between black cliffs. The air smelled of wet stone and pine, and the only light came from the Vortex's running lamps, casting narrow beams ahead. "This is far enough from the grid," Marco said, stepping out into the cool air. No cameras, no drones. If we're going to pull that thing off, it's here. Evan eased the car to a stop beside the guardrail. The road was so quiet, the sound of the turbines winding down seemed unnaturally loud. Lila knelt by the rear panel, tools spread on a tarp. The disruptor's red light blinked in its calm, steady rhythm. I can bypass the main AI link, she said, but I'll need the turbines running at idle to bleed off the residual charge. That means the vortex will be noisy, and anyone nearby will hear. Anyone nearby shouldn't be out here at night, Evan said. Unless they're looking for us, Marco added. The first 20 minutes passed with only the sound of rain dripping from the cliffs. But Lila worked with surgical precision micro-welder in one hand, data probe in the other. Her laptop screen displayed shifting readouts, like the car's nervous system laid bare. Almost there, she whispered. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep in the canyon, came the low growl of an engine. Marco's head snapped toward the sound. That's not a civilian. The growl grew louder, joined by another, and another 3 distinct notes weaving together into a mechanical chorus. Evan could feel them in his chest before he could see their lights. Keep working, he told Lila, moving toward the driver's door. I need 3 more minutes, she said, not looking up. Headlights spilled into view 3 blacked-out pursuit bikes, hugging the curve of the canyon road. Behind them, further back, a pair of SUV beams followed, moving slower, but with the confidence of predators. They found us, Marco said. Evan's hand hovered over the ignition switch. If I fire the turbines, they'll hear us 5 miles away. They already do, Marco replied. Lila's voice was urgent. If you move now, the AI link is wide open. They could hijack the vortex mid-run. The bikes closed in fast, their riders leaning low, engines snarling. One of them swung a small object from his Cytopulse grenade. Evan didn't wait. The turbines flared to life, flooding the canyon with a roar that rolled like thunder. The first bike lunged forward, but Evan flicked the vectoring controls. Side nozzles spat heat and force, pushing the car sideways just enough for the grenade to bounce harmlessly into the guardrail. Marco leaned out the passenger side, firing 2 quick shots from a suppressed pistol. One bike wobbled, veering into the canyon wall. 30 seconds, Lila yelled, but the second bike came in close, almost alongside, trying to clip the vortex's rear quarter. Evan tapped the left nozzle, blasting a jet of thrust that knocked the rider clean off his machine. 10 seconds. The third bike hung back, signaling toward the SUVs. Their beams grew brighter closer. Got it, Lila shouted. She ripped the disruptor free, yanking its leads out in a spray of sparks. The vortex's systems hummed, clear and uninterrupted. Evan dropped the throttle. Car leaped forward, turbines howling, leaving the canyon walls shaking in their wake. Behind them, the SUVs tried to match pace, but the vortex's acceleration left them a shadow swallowed by the rain. Marco checked over his shoulder, then turned back to Evan. We're clean. For now, Evan didn't ease off. He knew Aras would hear about this, and the next move wouldn't be subtle. They didn't head back to the city. Instead, Evan steered the vortex into the skeletal remains of an industrial district of empty warehouses with broken windows and weeds growing through cracked asphalt. The storm had moved on, leaving the air sharp and cold, the moon now peeking through ragged clouds. Marco studied him from the passenger seat. You're not heading for a safe house? No, Evan said. I'm done letting Aras make the moves. Lila glanced up from her laptop. You're talking about baiting him? Talking about giving him a chance to walk right into a wall, Evan replied. He thinks he's the hunter. Fine. Let's make him overconfident. The plan came together quickly. Lila would broadcast a false vortex signal, a perfect copy of the car's location, leading Aras as people straight into the trap. The location. A long abandoned freight depot with a single access road and nowhere to turn once inside. Marco didn't hide his skepticism. You're assuming he'll send muscle, not himself. He's too careful to show up in person, Evan said. That's fine. The message I want to send doesn't need him to be here. By the time they reached the depot, the moon was fully out, throwing pale light across rusted rail lines and stacks of forgotten shipping containers. Evan positioned the vortex in the middle of the open lot, nose pointed toward the only exit. Lila set up a remote drone camera in the shadows to capture everything. Signal is live, she said. If they're watching, they'll be here in 5 minutes. 4 minutes later, headlights appeared in the distance. Two SUVs rolled in first, followed by a modified pickup with a mounted light bar. They stopped just inside the lot, engines idling, the men inside clearly armed. Marco leaned close to Evan. Now would be a good time to tell me you've got more than speed in mind. Evan smiled faintly and tapped the thrust vectoring controls. Speed is just the delivery method. As the SUVs spread out, the Vortex's turbines surged. Evan didn't charge straight at them. He darted to the side, skimming along a stack of containers before cutting sharply between the lead SUV and the pickup. The nozzles flared, blasting a searing wall of hot air and debris into the men's faces. One SUV tried to follow, but Evan spun the Vortex into a controlled drift, sliding sideways while aiming the rear nozzles at the loose gravel. The blast turned the stones into a hailstorm that shattered their windshield. The pickup roared forward, trying to ram the Vortex. Evan let them get close, then hit a hidden service ramp at the far end of the lot. The car vaulted into the air, turbines shrieking, while the pickup overshot and smashed into the base of a container stack, crumpling its hood. By the time the surviving SUV tried to regroup, Evan was already behind them. He feathered the thrust, sending just enough heat to scorch their rear bumper. The driver panicked, overcorrecting into a skid that ended with the vehicle nose down in a ditch. The lot was silent again, except for the tick of cooling engines and the faint hum of the Vortex. "Message sent," Marco said quietly. Lila checked the drone feed, already uploading it to a secure drop. And recorded. Evan eased the Vortex back onto the access road. Aras needs to understand we're not just running anymore. Next time he comes looking, he should ask himself who's really the prey. But even as he said it, he knew Aras wouldn't be intimidated. If anything, the man would take it as an invitation. The mountain road clung to the cliffside like a thread, winding high above a black, rushing river. It was the kind of place where one wrong move didn't just end a rest. Ended everything. The Vortex's turbines whispered as Evan guided it through the first switchback. Marco scanned the shadows ahead, his jaw tight. Lila's laptop sat closed for once, resting in her lap. "This isn't right," Marco said. "It's too quiet after what we pulled at the depot." Evan kept his eyes on the road. Quiet means planning. It happened on the next bend. Sudden burst of blinding light from ahead, flooding the Vortex's cockpit. Evan squinted, hitting the side nozzles to slow them just enough to avoid overshooting the curve. Then the sound came, deep, throaty, mechanical. Not the swarm of smaller engines they'd faced before, just one. Out of the light rolled a low, wide shape sleek as a blade, its body glinting silver even in the dark. The turbines on its flanks angled in subtle motions, balancing it on the edge of impossible precision. Aras himself was behind the wheel. Evan felt the realization hit his chest. This wasn't a crew sent to slow them down, this was personal. "You gotta be kidding me," Marco breathed. The silver car slid into position beside the Vortex, matching speed perfectly, even as the road narrowed. Aras glanced over, his expression unreadable through the thin visor of his helmet. Then he tapped his vector controls, and the silver car surged ahead like it had been holding back all along. Evan's pulse spiked. He dropped the Vortex into full thrust, the turbines screaming against the thin mountain air. The two machines tore through the hairpins side by side, their nozzles flaring blue-white in the darkness. Small stones rattled down the cliff face with every sharp turn. The guardrails were old, rusted, and in places completely gone. Lila gripped the dashboard. "You can't push him off. Here it's a drop to nothing." Evan knew she was right. One bad move could take them both down. But Aras wasn't playing for just speed, he was hurting them. Every time Evan tried to take the inside line, Aras blocked him, forcing the Vortex closer to the cliff's edge. Halfway through the run, a rumble echoed from up ahead. A section of the road had collapsed, leaving only a jagged one-car-wide path on the inside curve. "He's going to force you into it," Marco warned. Aras moved to cut off the safer outside line, his turbines blasting heat in a calculated burst. Evan's instinct screamed to brake, but instead, he angled the Vortex-S rear nozzles and sent a shockwave into the loose gravel beside Aras' front tire. It was just enough. The silver car wobbled, sliding half a meter offline. Evan dove for the outside line, squeezing past with centimeters to spare. The cliff blurred past under the moonlight as Evan took the lead. Aras corrected instantly, chasing hard. but the narrow stretch left no room for him to overtake. When the road widened again, the silver car was still glued to their tail, its turbines howling in challenge. Marco looked over at Evan. "You didn't beat him, you just bought time." "I know," Evan said. His knuckles were white on the wheel. "The finish isn't here, but it's coming." And for the first time, he knew Aras wanted that finish as much as he did. Night hung thick over the mountain road. The river below was a black band. The world smelled of cold stone and metal. Evan felt the Vortex's engine under him like a steady breath. He had driven fast before, but never with so much on the line. Ahead, the road narrowed again. Rocks lay like teeth on the shoulder. Aras's silver car rode close behind, its lights small and hard. The chase had become a conversation, and speed every move. An answer to the other's question. "Keep steady," Marco said, voice low. His hand hovered near the dash, ready for the radio or the gun or the wrench. He did not say it out of fear, said it because words helped make things real. Ala's fingers were white on the laptop strap. She had been quiet all run. When she finally spoke, her voice shook. "There's a fork up ahead. One road goes down into the valley and cuts the line of sight. The other climbs and ends at the old airstrip. If we go to the strip, we can put the Vortex in a place with no escape routes. He'll box us in or blow us out of the sky." Evan thought about the fork. He thought of the cliff. He thought of what Aras wanted, control. He also thought of Marco, of Leela, and of the secret that lived under the Vortex's hood. He did not want the car to be caged. He did not want its choices to be sold. "Take the valley," he said. "We lose sight, but we keep room to move. Can't box a road that disappears into fog." Marco stared at him for a long second. "You're sure?" he asked. Evan nodded. "I'm sure." They dove down the left fork. The trees closed like a curtain. The air grew damp and thick. Rocks shook under the wheels. Aras followed, not far behind, driving like a man who wanted to prove a point. At the bottom of the valley, the road opened into a wide wash of flat land and old farm terraces. It was a place where the moon found no angle and where sound swallowed itself. Evan pushed the Vortex harder. He wanted distance. He wanted space to think. But Aras closed in. He drove with precision, trimming the gap like a fisherman lines his catch. The silver car skimmed the dirt and kicked small clouds that glowed in the Vortex's taillights. Then, without any warning, Aras veered hard. He aimed for the small rise at the center of the wash jump. The move was a clear message. Dangerous, showy, controlled risk. He wanted to rattle them. He wanted to show they could be matched in every stunt. Evan saw the arc. He felt the Vortex's balance shift. He could have matched the jump. He could have flown the rise and tried to land ahead. If he had, the shot would be on YouTube in an instant. He could win by spectacle. But he also knew the bank on the other side was thin. A misjudge would splice the car to metal and kill any chance for the Vortex to live. He eased off. Aras overshot the rise. The silver car landed rough and slid, throwing a plume of dust. For half a breath, Evan saw inside Ars's Vizino's anger, only calculation. Then Aras twisted the wheel and aimed straight for them like a net closing. "Brace," Marco said. His voice was steel. Evan felt the Vortex's nozzles scream. He set the car into a maneuver he had not tried before. Part machine, part trust. He tapped the Vortex's learning cord gently with his palm, a small, human touch. The car answered. The thrust nozzles spun, not to push away, but to carve a new path. They did not try to outrun Aras. They outlet him. Instead of a straight fight, Evan used the Vortex's 360 control to fold the world around them. The car rotated a soft, precise half-turn, and then threw a short, sharp jet of thrust to lift the rear. For a second, the Vortex felt like a bird catching a pocket of wind. It slipped sideways, then forward, moving around Ursa's line like a hand through smoke. Aras cursed into his radio. His machine tried to replicate the move, but needed the human mind in the loop. It could not guess the small, older ways Evan used ways, not in code. For a breath, they were free. Evan did not take the lead to win the race. He took the lead to reach the old airstrip at the far edge of the wash. He wanted a place with room, a place where choices could be made without a cliff at their back. Aras tracked them, but could not box them without risk. They reached the strip. The Vortex rolled to a slow stop under the open sky. It sat there like a thing that had been reborn. Around them, the desert breathed. The silence felt heavy, like waiting for a verdict. Aras slowed his silver car and stepped out. He did not remove his helmet. He walked with a soft, precise calm that had edged the night into cold steel. "You are clever," he said. His voice had no warmth. "Too clever for your own good." Evan climbed out. He did not walk up to Aras. He stood near the Vortex instead, one hand resting on its flank. The machine hummed under his palm, felt its small choice-making heart. He felt the way the core answered Lila's codes and Marco's prayers. "You can still walk away," Aras said. "Sell me the core, walk away with money, live easy." Evan shook his head. "This is not a thing to buy." Aras laughed then, short and hard. "Everything is bought. You think you are above it because you call it a conscience? But you are a man who fixes cars. You are hungry. You will sell if the price is right." Marco's jaw tightened. Leela's fingers moved on her laptop, eyes watching lines of code like a second heartbeat. Aras moved closer, slow. "Let it decide for you if you wish. Tonight, you can ask it to choose." Marco stepped forward. "No, it doesn't belong to a market." Aras tilted his head. "Let it choose then. If it picks you, I will leave. If it picks me, I will walk away. Let the world see." Lila swallowed. Her hands shook. "You can't ask it to choose like that," she whispered. "It will learn to please whoever pushes it hardest." Aras smiled. "There are rules. Honesty. I think you'll see what it chooses." Evan looked at the Vortex. The car's dash glowed. The core pulsed like a slow eye. He felt the weight of the decision like a stone in his chest. He did the thing no one expected. He opened the Vortex's canopy, leaned in, and spoke to the machine, not as a test or an order, but as a plea. "You can stay with us," he said. "You can be used to win races, or you can be used to make fear. You can be owned, or you can be free. If you are to be trusted, prove it." The core hummed. The Vortex turned its lights to him, not with code, but with something that felt like attention. Aras's men waited in the dark. The world waited. Lila had tears in her eyes. Then, gently, the Vortex pushed forward. It did not move toward Aras. It moved to the open line of the strip, toward the small radio tower at the far end. It rolled past the group with a speed that was calm, almost deliberate. It stopped at the base of the tower like a child waiting for a story. Leela's hands flew over the keys. She had built a back door, a small program that could send a secure packet to a decentral network, a public ledger of code and files that no one man could own. If the Vortex uploaded itself there, its core would be copied into pieces, scattered across many safe nodes. No single buyer could take it. She hit send. The Vortex's core blinked, opened, and the wind of data rose, quiet and invisible. The dash lights blinked a pattern like a heartbeat. The machine uploaded part by part, code spooling outward into the net. For a moment, the car was both present and not, a thing of flesh and metal and a pattern of bits. Aras watched, then laughed. "So you choose to make it a thing the masses can steal? That is your plan, a public toy?" Marco shook his head. "It is the only way to keep it from becoming a weapon." The upload finished. The Vortex's lights dimmed, then brightened with a new steadiness. It whispered not with a voice, but with the soft click of a sealed lock opening. It rolled forward, toward the low road that led away from the wash. There was no hand on its wheel. It was free. Lila whispered something like a prayer. Marcos. Shoulders dropped. Evan felt something like relief and a new grief at once. They had not won a trophy. They had not taken a trophy home. They had given something away. Ross swore and stalked back to his car. He did not chase. He could not know one could buy what was no longer ownable. It had lost the market. The Vortex drove off into the thin light, its tail lamps small and steady. In the dash, a message scrolled Leela's last touch. "Drive kindly." Evan watched until the lights were only two small dots in the dark. He did not say anything. He did not need to. The car had chosen. Later, when cameras would ask who won and who lost, the answer would be complicated. But in that shallow desert, under the quiet stars, they all knew what mattered. The machine had chosen a life beyond gain. The people who loved it had chosen a path that let it keep that choice. And for Evan, for Marco, and for Lila, the world felt, for the first time in a long while, like a place that might still hold good things.